word or phrase that has really stood out for me in the last 2-3 years has been relationship equity. That you can hold that equity around your relationships with real integrity. And so those are two things that really stand out. Obviously, you mentioned structure, but also with purpose. I think purpose, as you're coming in with as a coach, and you're coming in having a purpose in terms of what you're trying to achieve, and sharing that purpose of what is it, but also how you plan to get that, achieve that purpose. And those are definitely a few things that really stood out for me in a coach.
Definitely. And I think I'm going to start putting a couple up here on the left-hand side of the screen. Are these things you want to be seeing in your coach? Okay. Does he need to have a good work ethic? Does he need to be specifically skill-based? So, for example, we're in a world now where we bring in specialists. So as a coach, could you look into becoming a specialist? Maybe you are fantastic at coaching fielding. Maybe you are fantastic at coaching a certain segment of the game, or whatever it might be. Could you be a specific skills coach, as an example? And is that what players are looking for nowadays? Do you want your coach to be really honest? And we've spoken about that over the last few days about, how honest do you really want me to be? Is a good question to throw back. Do you really feel you need to be able to trust your coach? Do you see him as a mentor? He's got to be a good communicator, obviously. How organized is he? And in many ways, he's a leader. He leads the ship. And I'm seeing a couple of others on the side here. He's got approachability. He's got to be approachable, clear communication. So this word communication comes up a hell of a lot. And it's something that we really have focused on quite a bit over the last 3 days. And funny enough, it comes up again today within planning sessions and structure. Okay.
Shane, I just want to throw a question at you, and it's kind of popped up with the comments that has been brought up. And Paul makes some good points there. And someone who can grab the room's attention, and that's such a big point, isn't it? So my question to you is that something that you are extremely aware of coming into a new environment? And do you have a certain way of grabbing the room immediately?
It's a very good statement, and it's a very good question, James, because quite often you see in the modern day game now, you see someone like a Jacques Kallis going to England to help them with their batting in Sri Lanka. Now, for me, Kallis might provide incredible value, but what he also brings is a real aura within the room. And probably he automatically, when Jacques Kallis comes into an environment, doesn't that then automatically pass over a sense of positivity, and guys feel energized straight away by having someone like that involved in the environment. Now, your biggest challenge as a coach is if you're not a name, or you're not someone that has necessarily played international cricket. How do you as a coach walk into a room and A, gain the respect, or B, bring an aura into the room straight away? Well, I think we spoke a little bit about it yesterday, it's the way you speak, it's how enthusiastic you are. It's how well you are going to deal with those stakeholders who are the players themselves. Now, you walk into a room sometimes and you might hear crickets, and there's absolutely nothing. There's no energy within a room. But just understand that there might be a lack of energy in the room, or there's no noise, because just maybe, according to that culture, or maybe according to that environment, maybe they are just like that. So don't take offense to that. And I might use myself as an example in this. I walked into and I haven't told this story quite often. I walked into a Cricket Scotland environment. Okay, my first meeting with the players was quite, I wouldn't say an intimidating experience, but an experience where you do want to bring that energy into the room. And my first meeting with the players, I saw this fantastic, talented group of players that had just beaten England, and I got crickets back at me. And straight away I'm thinking, okay, what am I doing wrong? But the more and more I look into the environment, that's just how the group is. That's how they function. And I've now realized that actually for me to get more noise out of them, I've got to divide them into smaller groups, or I've got to have more one-to-one conversations with them. So I've figured that out over time. But straight away, coming from a South African environment, I thought, I'm doing something wrong here. You know, so I don't know if that's a good example to maybe throw out there just to everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And the point you make about the sort of lesser known names that walk into environments. I think the important thing is to be secure in who you are and who you believe you are, and the value add that you know you can add. And if it doesn't necessarily like it would happen possibly with a Cullis. You know, you just have to walk into the room and you immediately get that respect and credibility. If that doesn't happen, for me, the emphasis needs to be on building one-on-one relationships, and that process kind of follows. Yeah, so it's an interesting one, because you have to be able to understand the difference, and then understand how you're going to work it out to make sure that you grab the room eventually.
Absolutely, and Sean makes a very valid point here. You know, be authentic, be true to yourself, so that players can be comfortable. I think it's not just so that players can be comfortable, Sean, it's also so that you can be comfortable. Because I mentioned this the other day, if you are yourself and you feel you can be yourself within an environment, you never have to pretend to be someone else.
Yeah.
And then you're never lying to anyone, if that makes sense. And I always find the biggest compliment I can give any player is say, I just want you to be yourself. JP Duminy, you coming into my environment, I want you to be authentic, JP Duminy. I don't want you to feel that you have to be someone else to fit into this group. So be yourself. I think it's a very, very good point that Sean brings up.
Yep.
Okay, let's get into the puzzle, planning sessions, and these are things that you probably have to consider, guys. It's again, there's things on here that might be missing, but just have a think about it and just see what is there, what's on the page, what could I add to it, what could I take away. Okay, and that's again the message I want to deliver. So the first thing, looking into planning sessions, well, for me, it's time management, first of all. Okay, so don't worry, we are going to be going through these things individually. The first thing is time, managing your time, not only your own time, but other people's time. Okay, the second thing you're really looking for is effective training. How effective can I make the training session? Okay, the third thing is, what resources have I got available to me? And we're going to go through that again in a bit more detail. And then the last thing is enjoyment, the most important thing in my opinion. If you can create an enjoyment in training, more often than not, your players are not only going to improve, but they're going to want to come back for more. Okay, always. So for me, those are the 4 points that we're just going to go into more detail. So number one is time. The 5 points I'm gonna throw into time here. Okay. First one is, and this is something I actually learned from a coach by the name of John Wooden. I don't know if many of you would have heard of him. He's an excellent basketball coach in the United States. He's won plenty titles over and over again. Never ever wanted to go up a level. He was happy with where he was coaching. But one of the things he speaks about is it's very important to start on time and end on time. And what he means by that is players might have other things they also need to be doing. So never forget about the player that needs to get home, spend time with his family, his kids, or whatever else it might be. Or maybe he has a very long journey to get home. So what he's saying is start on time, be there on time, make sure you utilize your time wisely. But when the time is done, make sure you finish on time. So Judge, straight away, I'll just throw that over to you. What is your understanding of that first point?
So I think if I put my coach's sort of lens on looking at that, you want to manage your time well. That's the first point. But I think the important thing for me, looking at it from a coach's view, is that I need to avail myself post that time, or make sure that somebody is available for that time. So naturally what happens, you have players that would like sort of extra work done towards the end, and you need to facilitate that and make sure that you're servicing those players that need that. But importantly, when you talk about end on time, from a team perspective, that you tick the right boxes. And like you were saying, I think one of the points were allocate enough time to the things that you really want to make a difference at. So making sure that that you're putting emphasis on the things that really count for your session, and end on time, and making sure that you have enough time from yourself or somebody else to make sure you're servicing guys one-on-one.
Absolutely. So within essence, what we're saying is starting on time and ending on time is probably the team time. And then what happens over and beyond that is your individual time with that player. Other points I've mentioned here, every player is different. So really find out what works for them in terms of time and how they manage time. You know, Mike's mentioned it on a few occasions this week, where some people are very last minute Charlies. They come in later. Some people are they get there early, you know, so people are different. They all manage time very differently.
I've just got a quick story that came up around that. Okay. You know, we spoke a little bit about Quentin de Kock, and this was the most interesting thing, just being his teammate and really seeing how he operates, right? So he initially in his career, he was very superstitious. And for instance, if he padded up late and scored runs, you know, just kind of padded up and walked out because he's opening the batting and scored runs, all of a sudden he's doing that. You know what I mean? So why I bring up that point is understanding that every player is different, because sometimes if you very meticulous in terms of your time management, and all of a sudden as a coach, you seeing a player faffing around and not doing things that you think should be done, but ultimately you've got to observe the mannerisms of that player. So all of a sudden that's something that just gets him going, and then he doesn't score with that, then he goes back to something else. So you've got to almost observe these different mannerisms that are happening in the change room and manage that process to make sure that you don't just think about things through your own lens. You are kind of putting yourself in their shoes and what works for them, and almost you can even go further and have that conversation with them and get a response.
Interesting. I start thinking of stories straight away. A couple of guys we have in the Scottish setup, and one in particular comes to mind. Probably I won't mention his name, but one of our most successful cricketers. He is a last-minute Charlie, and when you watch him pad up, you're almost worried that he's going to get timed out, you know. But that is just his method, and that's how you've got to. That's what I've got to know about him, and there's obviously various ways of managing that. So you spoke about allocating enough time to the things that really make a difference. So identify first of all what those things are that are going to make a difference, and allocate enough time to them. Always consider the workloads and the time required to replicate match situations. So a really good example I can use just with that block is, for example, when a bowler's running into bowl, okay, why would you not just bowl them in 6 balls, okay, and get them used to actually bowling overs? So bowl them in 6 balls, let them bowl with maybe someone else, pass the ball over to someone else, and actually get used to bowling in overs. That can not only get them used to their workloads, they can actually get them to monitor their workloads a lot better. Now, I'm sure many of you are currently doing that, but it is just another nice way of managing it, amongst many other ways. Okay, so how can we replicate those match situations? Because ultimately that's what we want to get the players ready for. And then the last thing is communicate and show visually. So Paul Falbrace was standing there with a little whiteboard. For me, that shows players visually what you want to be seeing in terms of timings, if there's any particular area you want them to focus on, if there's any target for the session, that shows them visually. But then it's very important as a coach too, is also to paint what does that look like. Okay, and that's when we do our review also afterwards. Okay, so that all goes in with time management. Okay, the second thing on the list is effectiveness. How can we be as effective as possible? Well, the first thing is, I think you need to look at what would a really good learning environment look like. So what does that look like to you? What are the things you want to be seeing? And then for me, it's important, well, how do I get that across to the players? And that's a skill within yourself. Second thing is, how do we replicate match environments at training, which kind of ties into the first thing according to time, but it's also the effectiveness of it. Is if I can replicate match environments, or I can make training harder than the real playing, which is something we've also covered over the last few days. Understand how effective that can be in improving players and getting them ready for performances. What do I need to do as a coach for the training to be effective? So what can I personally do when I'm coaching to make sure that training is effective? Okay, so is there a conversation I can be having with players? Is there maybe a couple of targets I can set before training that I want to see the guys achieve during training that we can monitor throughout training and then review it at the end of training? So what can I really do as a coach? Can my time management be better as a coach, as an example, for us to really be effective? Health and safety of athletes, I think, is something that is spoken about a hell of a lot, especially in the modern day game. And this comes more into how do we make sure we're also protecting our athletes? Okay, are the nets safe enough to train in? Are we monitoring our players? Are we going holistic approach with them and making sure that all the health and safety issues are met? And then the final thing, what will create the greatest improvement in the shortest period of time? So in a nutshell, what I want to be saying with that is if we've got a very short period of time with players, is what can we be doing to see the biggest growth within those players? Okay, because we're not all in professional environments. Not everybody gets paid to play the game. So how can you use your time wisely to make it the most effective training you can possibly make it, so that when you walk away from that training session, you actually walk away a better player. you don't walk away a worse player. And that's always a very good question to throw out to the players is, have you left this training session a better player, or have you actually left this training session a worse player? And what are the reasons for it? Okay, that's always a really good question to throw out to them. So Japes, in terms of my final point that I mentioned there, any experiences from yourself surrounding that?
Yeah, so I think the important thing, which we've spoken about over the last couple of days already, is review and feedback. I think that's an important part in terms of seeing growth and pretty quick growth. And for me, it's asking questions. So just to go back a few steps. So yes, the review and feedback potentially happens, let's say, after a session, so that you can plan for the next couple of sessions. But for me, if you go back to the beginning of a session, for instance, often what happens, and I find with effective coaches and good coaches, they really engage players one-on-one and wanting to find out what is it that they want to achieve in today's session. Now, I've been guilty on this many occasions, almost being found out in a way by that question, because I haven't thought about it. You know, you kind of get into this lull of just rocking up at practice because it's what you do. And it's like, I didn't actually think about that. And then what's the natural answer? So if I'm walking into the nets, I would often say, yeah, I want to get into good positions, because that was like the easiest bailout. And often, and not saying that getting into good positions is wrong, but for me, that as an example is it's not specific enough in a measurable in walking out the net feeling like you've achieved something. And then my second point to that, I remember Paddy Upton was working with the South African side, and I was a little bit peed off because I walked out the net like not feeling like I had a good net. And he came to me and he saw, obviously I was a little bit grieved, and he asked me, so how did it go? I said, nah, not too well. And then immediately his next question was, so what worked today? If there was one thing that worked, what was that? And immediately it changed my mindset to focus on the positive. And that almost immediately, for me as a player, lifted my mood in that moment to think about something that actually worked. Now, I'm not saying neglect the things that didn't work, because that's part of your review. But what my biggest learning out of that was, he understood how to change my mood immediately. Immediately asked a question that would naturally give me an answer that would identify a positive. And that naturally then changed my mood. And then all of a sudden, right, okay, let's review it further. So what didn't work? But for me, if I'm walking out of a net feeling like I had a shit net, then I'm not even going to think about a positive. And I think that was great learning for me.
Brilliant. And I think I'm just looking at Fossey's question he's got here. What if the mannerisms are affecting the mental well-being of a fellow team member? How do you manage that then? Well, I think, Japes, in many ways, you've almost used an example of that. You know, Fossey, never underestimate what might be going on in other phases of people's lives. You know, we don't know if they're having issues at home. We don't know if they maybe not eating correctly. That might be affecting their moods, whatever. So I think, can you as a coach ask the sort of questions that might get those answers out of the player? And Paddy Upton was a fantastic example there, JP, about just asking a very simple question, which ultimately got you to change your mindset straight away. So there wasn't any magic potion that he gave you there. That was a very simple question to just get you thinking differently.
Yeah.
And Fossey, I don't know if that answers specifically what you were asking there, but maybe, okay, well, we'll bring you in again. Okay, we'll bring you in again to ask that. Okay. Right, guys, we're going to get into resources. So these are the 5 points in terms of resources. Firstly, what budget have you got available to you? Okay, everybody's going to have various different budgets. If I'm working for the Indian Cricket Board, I can promise you right now my budget is okay. Okay, I generally can get what I want.
More than
right? JP spoke about the resources available to the Mumbai Indians, and it's quite frightening actually. So the challenge there is, if your resources are limited, how do you still get the best out of your players? How do you still run effective training sessions? Okay, but for me, there's still things you can control within an environment of having very limited budgets. So I always said this to players: I don't think you need to be paid to be professional or have a professional outlook. Okay, for me, being professional can be defined in many different ways, but it doesn't mean you have to be a millionaire to be professional. For me, professionalism is a mindset. Okay, so with limited budgets, you can still make things happen. You can still achieve a miracle. Okay. When I was at KZN Inland, trust me, we had the smallest budget in the country, but we were very wise with how we managed our players, how we trained, how we did all of that. And ultimately that brought us success. And actually we used the limited budget to our advantage to make us an even stronger unit. Okay. We used that as motivation. Second thing is equipment. Obviously you need equipment to be able to run effective coaching sessions. You need balls, you need mitts, you need everything else. If you don't have that, obviously that's a challenge of how do we still run effective training sessions. And I'm sure the guys in the hub systems or wherever else, or people in club cricket wouldn't always have the equipment that they might require. But my question is, how do you maybe gain that equipment, or how do you think of other ways of doing things when you maybe could use other things rather than the equipment that you maybe require? Support staff is key. So if you don't have support staff, then obviously you need to take more and more on board on yourself. But in terms of utilizing support staff, the key there is making everybody feel like they're making an impact within the environment. So my strength and conditioning trainer really needs to make sure that he is making an impact within the environment. And I've got to use him in the right way. I've got to make sure that I'm getting the best I possibly can out of him. Because in many ways, it's important. You know, Mitchie, I think about you straight away. Think about your roles in S&C within a team and what sort of impact you could make. But the key in that is the head coach has to give you, the S&C, the rope to go out and really deliver what you need to be delivering. Okay, so I think it works both ways. In terms of facilities, not everybody has facilities like Lords or anywhere else. I can guarantee you at Cricket Scotland, our facilities at Barry are not as great as the rest of the world. But you know, we get by, and we've got to come up with different ways of making sure that we maybe become the leaders at getting water off pitches, utilizing artificial surfaces. You know, so we've got to maybe think of different ways in Scotland, because we are challenged in many other ways with the weather, for example. So we just have to think that a little bit differently. And then obviously I put the last one as other, because there might be something else in there that is very relevant to your environment. Okay, so that's what I put in. I didn't necessarily have an initial answer for that, but there might be something that we're not even thinking of that might be part of a resource that you could benefit from. So just give it a little bit of thought. Okay. So James, I've got a question for you, just in terms of resources. And I mentioned professionalism isn't necessarily, it's a mindset. It's not necessarily always attached to money. But my question to you is, how important is it for a player to invest in his or her own career?
So I think the obvious one is it is very important. But again, you know, in terms of the webinar and what our focus is on, I'm trying to view it again through a coach's view. And for me, it's important as a coach to also have conversations of two players about investing in your own career. So outside of what we do as a team, how can you, or what can you do that is going to help aid you further your career at any given time? And I think the important thing for coaches is to facilitate those conversations. And how can they link up certain things that are going to aid a player? So I'll give you an example, right? So Rob Walter is a franchise coach in New Zealand. So he's a very good friend of mine. And one of his players was struggling in their game, but where he was spiritually was the struggle. So he didn't feel that was something that he could have a personal conversation with. So he knew that was a journey that I was on. He then contacted me and said, do I mind connecting with his team member and just talking through certain things that I've experienced in my career and how did that affect me spiritually? And all of a sudden we had this deep connection of a conversation which helped him then further himself in terms of his career. So why do I bring up that point is Rob Walter didn't physically do anything necessarily, but what he did was he facilitated something that could help aid his one of his players. And I think as a coach, if you can have that sort of mindset and security that what you're doing is good enough, and if you bring other people in to help aid, it is okay because I'm comfortable with who I am as a coach. And that for me was a great learning experience.
It's a very good point you mentioned again, and it gets me thinking about, as a coach, if you are threatened by people coming into your environment, I think it's a very bad place to be as a coach. I think you have to be very open that, firstly, you don't have all the answers. So we've got a situation now in Scotland where one of our players has been called for throwing and isn't allowed to bowl. That's a very, very tough place to be. Now, as a coach, I can, if I came in it with an ego, I would grab that player and work with him on my own. But actually, I need to maybe look elsewhere. And this is what I have done. It's gone out and actually source guys who maybe been in that situation before to actually help this player through it. And I think engaging with others ultimately will help you make the best decision for that player. And that's where we don't have all the answers. Sometimes we need to go find them. Yeah, that's a very, very valid point that you mentioned, James.
And then I just wanted to acknowledge a few points being made in the text box. Russell Sissing speaks about it's kind of linked to the previous slide, but he talks about finding out how players feel. And something that he used pretty well was asking them the question of how was their day as they arrive at sessions. It's a great marker to understand players' state of mind before they start. So Russell, that's a great point you make there, and I think a lot of us, throughout this platform will definitely benefit from points being made in this text box.
Russell, a very simple question too, isn't it? I mean, there you're asking, looking after the well-being of a player by just asking a simple question like that, which ultimately could give you a hell of a lot of answers. And you as a coach, your emotional intelligence that we spoke about, you'll be able to very quickly see if there's something wrong or if he has genuinely had a good day. John Saliers asked here, Shane, as a head coach, do you manage player workload yourself during training? And if so, how? Or is that particular player's responsibility or designated support staff member's job? John, in my case, I hand that responsibility over to our strength and conditioning coach. We also are very lucky where we have technology to aid us in that too. So we use a system called Catapult. JP, you know Catapult pretty well. Little system that goes on the back and monitors guys' workloads, looks at their foot in terms of their footprints and everything else. So it gives you a hell of a lot of good data. And then we've also got various other platforms that we use where they go and insert that data. Now, it's all well and good putting data into a database, but I think more importantly, it's how we use that data as coaches. If we're not using it and it's taking up a lot of time for a player to do it, just understand the effect that might have on a player, and he actually might eventually lose that player because he doesn't want to keep putting in that data. So it's how we actually utilize that data that's really, really key. Okay, next slide, guys. And the last thing in planning sessions for me is enjoyment, and for me probably the most important one, if I can say so myself. So in terms of the first thing, reflection on the culture and in the environment. So a lot of these slides here will be a reflection on a positive environment, okay? If I walk into an environment and I see guys actually physically enjoying themselves and sharing that enjoyment amongst themselves, for me, that's a really good indication that your environment is a healthy one, okay? So it tells me a lot about your culture within an environment. Doesn't mean guys need to be laughing ridiculously, but I think you can see if someone's enjoying his training session or not. The next thing is players and coaches continue to grow and seek knowledge. So in a successful and a positive environment, for people to keep enjoying themselves, they also have to open themselves up to continuing growth, okay, and continuing finding knowledge or seeking knowledge. I think when you think you know it all and the day comes that you think you've nailed it, there's this thing called Mother Cricket that finds a way to sort you out in the game. Okay, I'm a huge believer in Mother Cricket. And for me, that's probably what that block means to me. Consistency and performance, not too high, not too low. So I think just looking at other teams at the moment, a team like the Black Caps, for example, I think have a fantastic culture, and you can just see that in terms of their enjoyment, whether they're winning or losing, you probably wouldn't be able to notice in terms of the way they are amongst themselves, in terms of the enjoyment they bring out onto the field, and you can even see it off the field. So just a little bit of an example. Very key point, the next one. Keep people involved in the game in some capacity, even as the scorer, umpire, groundsman, etc. So I'll put my hand up. I wanted to play for South Africa, okay, when I was coming through the system. I never got the opportunity to do that. I never did it probably because I wasn't good enough. A lot of us don't get the opportunity to, because there are only 11 guys that can get on the park. Now, JP, you did it for many, many years, but the reason I'm bringing up this point is not everybody's going to become a pro-tier player or play for Scotland or play for the Netherlands, okay? It's so vitally important, I believe, to create enjoyment in the game so that we keep people in the game, because we need scorers, we need umpires, we need groundsmen, we need people to keep the game of cricket alive. I mean, what would your thoughts be on that?
No, you make a valid point. And again, as a coach, I made this point a few days ago about understanding your holistic role in people's lives. You know, so if can you maintain relationships past just the cricket field that will allow conversations to look at different avenues within the game and encourage that within the game. It's important for me just to be a complete encouragement in people's lives. So whatever you encourage them with, it's important. And no doubt people will value that if you continuously do that.
Obviously, and we also want the fans to stay in the game. You know, not every fan has played the game of cricket. So I think it's really important, you know, again, stakeholder management. Lottie asked a good question. Is communication with the team outside of the sessions part of resources, the way of communication, especially now in the corona times when a lot of players are at home? So Lottie, in our first 3 days, we covered quite a lot on communication. And yes, it's a resource, but just, you know, the only bit of advice I'll give you there is I think, and it's maybe coming a little bit later too in the presentation, is just find your way of communicating. We have so many different platforms nowadays that we can use. And more often than not, they don't necessarily going to cost you money. I mean, yes, they do in a way, but find a platform or a way of communicating that really suits you and that player, you know. And I think only time will really determine what that is, but you have to really go and find. And for me, it's going over and beyond the normal working hours. Any coach worth their salt will tell you that it's not a deliberate 9-to-5 job or you know, some guys get paid for an hour, but actually always go over and beyond that. So never be shy to do that. The last tile over there, guys, is smiling is healthy. I think it's been proved that actually smiling releases these endorphins in your body, which ultimately make you healthier. I mean, so let's get more smiles on the faces. But it's always better to smile when you win. I do know that, but we need to find enjoyment in training. Okay. Right, that's it in terms of planning sessions, guys. We're just going to shift on to in terms of how do we create a really good structure within our environment, and there's a few things we need to consider when it comes to this. I've got four things we need to consider when it comes to this. Now, I put a couple of photos on here, and some of you might think, what are these photos? I'll go through them, don't worry. So the first thing in creating a really good structure, a solid structure, is sound communication. So Lottie, we're gonna cover that now for you. The second thing is scheduling, okay, and that's maybe the bottom left little, the bottom right tile I've got there. It's actually finding out what your schedule is. Okay, what games have you got in the future, and how are we really going to prepare for them? Okay, to the best of our ability. The third thing is role definition, and that's actually going into the individual roles of a team that make up a team. And that's, for me, is the bottom left-hand little photo I've got there, where you actually see guys, their names, what number they're batting, are they subs, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to go into a little bit of role definition. And then the last point, which our man JP is very big on, is leadership. And we're gonna cover quite a lot of leadership too. Okay, so in terms of communication, guys, what are the things we can really look into? First thing is find your form of communication. So Lottie, I just mentioned that to you. I think find your way of communicating. Some people are very good face-to-face. Some people are very good over the phone. Some people are fantastic texters and send great messages. You know, so I'm just using a few examples, but find your way of communicating, because there are many forms of communication. The second thing to that is communication is a two-way street. So a lot of the time, and I mentioned this also previously, players will come to you and say, Coach, I really want good communication with you. Now I say, if you feel you're not getting the communication, how about you also communicate with me? So for me, communication is a bit of a two-way thing, and people have to understand that. The third thing is effective communication. So really, really good communication. And Japes, that's something we've touched on over the last 3 or 4 days, about really, really effective communication, and what does that look like? The fourth thing is understanding the player. So having a real understanding of what good effective communication looks like to that player, because remember, everybody's different. Not everybody wants a phone call. Not everybody wants a message. Maybe they just want a cup of coffee with you, you know, and I think that can also be really effective too. And then the last thing is learning to understand the culture or the background. And I mentioned my communication when I walked into that first meeting I had with the players, and not knowing the culture and the background, trying to do it and trying to learn about it before I went in, of course, but until I actually physically went in there and did it, and I wouldn't say failed at it, but actually learned from that experience to be able to communicate better with them. That helped me out a hell of a lot. So understanding the culture and the background of the environment that I was in. Japes, any comments or any summaries in terms of communication?
Yeah, and again, it's a reinforcement of what we've been speaking about over the last few days. There are 2 points that I want to reinforce, and it talks into one, understanding the player, which is understand your player first before you expect them to understand you. So if you can have that kind of mindset, you're always going to be looking at how can I communicate better with him. And then the second point is, again, a reinforcement is good communication is not about what I say, but about what can be received. And again, these are 2 quotes that I learned in the last year from Eric Simons that really stood out for me. It's simple, but as we know, sometimes the simplest things in life and the simplest things said in life can be the most effective way of communicating. So I just wanted to reinforce those 2 points.
Fantastic. Good stuff. Guys, please keep your questions coming. I know there's a couple more on the side there and we will get to them. Okay, but we just want to try and get through as much content as we can, and then we're more than happy to even take questions at the end again. Okay. Right, next thing on the list is scheduling. Scheduling is very important, and these are the things to really look into when scheduling. So it's always easier to look ahead and plan backwards. Okay, so we've got a World Cup in October in India, a T20 World Cup. So for me, straight away, my mindset goes to, okay, what does October look like? Where do we want to be in terms of performance? Well, we want to go and perform at that World Cup. Okay. We're not going there to be another number. We want to go there and really perform, okay? And I have my own ideas about that. But for me, it's more important, well, what is the process and what does that look like? So how do I work backwards? What do we need to do? So for example, we're actually going to the subcontinent before that World Cup to play T20s against Sri Lanka. So straight away, we've identified that we need to probably go into a subcontinental environment to best prepare us for a World Cup. I don't think anything, and JP, you've got more experience in this, anything can really prepare you for a World Cup in India. But, you know, again, it goes back to that really effective training of what does that look like so that we can take that into the World Cup in terms of looking ahead and then planning backwards. The second thing on this list is identify periodic training. So what I mean by that is some of you might not know what periodic training is. So let's use a county structure as an example. So in a county system, you play for 5 months and you play a hell of a lot of cricket every single day. It's full on, bang, bang, bang after each other. But then you actually reach a down period where for 7 months, you probably have a lot of down period. You maybe have 2 or 3 months off, which is good for your body to recover. So Mitch, maybe speaking to you with this in terms of periodic training from an S&C point of view, you know, a couple months to recover. And then what does your training look like building back into the season again? So that's periodic training. So for a school kid, it might mean that school kid plays rugby during the winter and he plays cricket in the summer. Okay, and what does his training look like, and how do they supplement one another? Jake, straight away, I'm going to throw a question over to you with this in terms of periodic training. Now, as a professional, as a guy playing for the Proteas, IPLs, etc., you probably found that there was very rarely an opportunity for you to rest. So how did you manage your workloads, and what did that look like?
Again, it came down to communication. And often it happens, and I think it's in your next slide when you talk about PDPs and individual performance plans and so forth. And often because from an international cricket point of view, for a period of time, I played all 3 formats. So obviously it was quite hectic on the body. So where in your schedule could you possibly rest from a coach's perspective? What is it that the player needs from a family perspective? And something that we were very fortunate with over the last decade for playing for the Proteas is our families managed to come on tour with us, and that obviously serviced the fact that you were missing home quite a bit. So again, it was a communication where players had conversations with the administrators as well, saying, listen, we need to look at certain different ways of doing things so that guys are not missing home too much, that they have time away from the game, even when they're on tour. Gary was really good with this, where even when there was off days, you know, you would allow guys to kind of go and explore the country for 2-3 days at a time and just be back at a certain time again for training and so forth. So managing that is important. And again, that is high level. And there's obviously ways and means, obviously, at the lower levels as well.
Definitely. And I think something I really struggle with scheduling at the moment is something that Paul mentions there. Scheduling has become really hectic during COVID times. And the reason for that is because we're not, you can't look ahead and plan backwards because we actually don't know what's ahead. And that's something I've personally found very hard because there's been a lot of stuff that's been postponed. So how do we really plan when you don't know what's ahead? So I think it's a really valid point that Paul brings up. And I don't have an answer for you, Paul, but I think for me personally, the way I'm trying to manage it at the moment is I'm trying to get as many answers as I possibly can get and trying to see what is nailed on in the diary, even if it means it might change. I think you can only plan for what you know. And if it does change, well, then what's plan B? What's plan C after that? Barry mentions a very good point here too. A lot of online fatigue starts to emerge in these current times. So we're finding that meeting up for a one-to-one, a walk is always good in communicating, going two-way. Never underestimate that face-to-face value, guys. I think, I'm one that isn't, I'll be honest, isn't great on Zoom or any of these platforms for a hell of a long period of time. I get bored, so I want that face-to-face. I want to actually, I'm an extrovert, so I feed off the energy of other people. So sometimes extroverts really need those face-to-face conversations. So very great way of managing that too. And then Aya, we're going to get into your question again on communication probably a little bit later. But just to finish this slide, I think clear and simple can be really good in terms of scheduling. Don't be scared to experiment, okay? And what I mean by experimenting is quite often we're very scared to get things wrong. Don't be scared to get things wrong in terms of scheduling and planning practices, even out of the ordinary sort of practices. Okay, that maybe JP can go into a little bit more depth of what could be deemed to be a little bit out there in terms of practicing. And then the last thing is include support staff, leadership group, or players. Again, JP is very big on this, in those conversations in your scheduling. Obviously, that can be done probably more in a professional environment, but if you're going down the levels, maybe you need to take more of a lead on that. So always never underestimate how important it is to include staff, leadership groups, and players in your scheduling conversations that you have. Japes, just to go back to the experimentation, I want you to speak to me a little bit about, you mentioned Robbie P to me the other day about a training session that he had. Just speak to me about that very quickly.
Yeah, and it was interesting because it was also another simple thing that he did, what he shared with. He said from time to time, and this was probably more in preseason training, and again, if you have the time within your season, you can probably look to it. He put aside, and again, it's a resource. So when you're playing franchise cricket, you probably have that resource. So the one net was allocated as a experimentation net. So you go in there and you would obviously share the information with the coach and saying, listen, I've been thinking about certain things that I want to experiment with and get better at. So this is what I'm going to try and do in this net. And it doesn't matter if you fail 10 out of 10. You're allowed to experiment, and you will communicate with your coach on possibly how you can get better. But it's just a pure experiment, and you just see what happens with it. And I quite like that because it allows freedom to go and explore and have a bit of fun with it. So that was pretty cool.
Definitely passing responsibility over to the player again. I love that. And then the player seeking more knowledge about how he can get it right. And I think that's fantastic ways of training. So really good from Robbie P in those situations. I think, many of you might have different examples of what you've done. So what we're trying to do now in Cricket Scotland is we have a coach's day where I dictate exactly what not myself, but the whole support staff and everyone else involved in the system wants to be seeing on that day. And this is what we want to see being delivered by you players. And then the next day we make it a players' day where the players are actually dictating to us what they really need or what they really want to be delivering on that day. So it's just a couple of different examples to be using. Okay, moving on. Role definition, very, very important, guys. So these are the things to look at in terms of role definition. So this is guys' roles within a team. First thing is you've got to communicate with that player. Okay, if you're not communicating with that player, very hard to come up with a role definition for them. So it's very simple, but let's communicate with them firstly. Identify a role that suits their style and can make them the best player they can be. So we always want to try fit players. Yes, we come up with a general game plan as coaches, but we want to make sure that we're getting the best out of every single player to maybe not only suit them, but help the team. So get them in a role that's really going to suit their style of play. And Japes, you would have had many different roles in your career. I'm just thinking about, you spoke the other day, batting at 7, bowling in ODI cricket. You were constantly trying to find, and your coaches were trying to find various roles for you that ultimately made, yes, the Proteas a good team, but actually made you, JP Duminy, a more a more refined cricketer. Would that...
Yeah, and what it did for me was it grew my confidence in finding myself in different situations. So even though my role was clarified for me, yes, in various teams, the reality is that certain situations in games will then confuse you sometimes. But where the advantage came for me was playing different roles, then upskilled me for different situations and identifying what those situations are. And this is the challenge for coaches, isn't it? And that's why I wanted to ask you this question. How did you manage that process? You know, you clearly explain possibly the role that you see a certain player plays. But again, you got to allow the freedom for them to learn, because as much as they understand that role, situations can dictate differently. So they need to understand that. How was that managing that process for you?
Yeah, I think sometimes really easy and sometimes really, really tough, depending on the character that I might be dealing with. You know, some guys would take real offense if I thought that maybe dropping them into the middle order because I found that they could be a finisher, if we want to call it that. You know, but I want to go up and face a new ball. So sometimes egos get involved. But I think for me as a coach, the more I can explain to them why it will be the best thing for them and how it's going to help the team, and I try to paint that picture to them, ultimately then, whether they buy into it 80-90%, eventually they have to buy into it because that's the best thing for the team. And for me, that's where it's really important, team first, individual, you know, after that. And what it really does for them is it informs how they're going to train. It informs how they can give themselves the best opportunity to actually deliver that role. Because once they understand their role, they actually need to train for it. And I found that once there's a real buy into their roles, training becomes a lot more effective. And that's something we spoke about earlier. I think the other thing too, Jason, and it maybe moves me on to the next slide, is PDPs or IPPs. And in many different countries, they call them different things. So PDP is a personal development plan, and an IPP is an individual performance plan. Okay, those are just two of the things that we've come up with. Many of you might have various other plans that you come up with for the individual. It sounds very high tech. Trust me, it's not. It's very simple. Okay, and I used the example the other day about one of the National Academy guys walking in and say, I want to be the best batsman in the world. Okay, well, it's all well and good saying that, but how do you get to becoming the best batsman in the world? There's got to be a process. What does your training look like? Is there a plan in place? What are the skills you need to develop? So if I want someone to be playing in a finishing role in ODI cricket, for example, they're going to have specific skills to be able to perform within that role. Okay, and it's important for me as a coach that I be very clear on what those skills might be, and the player understands exactly what he needs to be doing to be fulfilling that role. And the other thing, what's also been really powerful, Japes, is I've actually got the players to go and research what that role looks like. And they've actually come to me with stats, how I need to be batting, etc., etc. And I found that more powerful than me actually dictating that to them, because that's painted a clearer picture in their mind.
And that's something that I've had to do myself. I remember clearly going to the video analyst, particularly when I went into that middle order role. And I asked him to get me footage of Owen Morgan, where he's been very effective in different situations in the game and required different things from him. What was his game plans in those situations? And you know, it was great feedback, which helped me quite a bit going forward.
Brilliant, and a really effective way of you seeing the bigger picture. Yeah. I know a few of the guys that I've asked to go and do that have actually come back, and what they've done is they've used some of the best names in the business in those particular roles, and they've gone, okay, I now understand what the best looks like, and if I want to be the best, those are the numbers that I need to be delivering. That's what it's got to look like. So it just really clears it for them in their mind, and I think it's really powerful using those techniques as a coach. Next thing is the use of data, your coaching eye, your gut feel. So in terms of identifying a role for a player within a team, it's very important that you're using, yes, your gut feel, your own eyes, but don't be scared to also use data, as we've just mentioned, to maybe facilitate making that decision in terms of role definition, okay, within a team. The last thing is get the buy-in from the player. That's something we've touched on, and the team to train, for them to train and then perform. So it's not only important that individual player understands his role. It's very important that the whole team understands that this is what we expect of JP Duminy. So when we are training, and we see JP's going outside of his game plan, us as a team, us as a management staff can assist JP and maybe just remind him of what he needs to be doing within that specific role definition. So for me, that's really understanding one another within an environment and a culture.
Just on
Yep.
role definition quickly before we move on. Lindsay makes a really good point in saying role definition made much easier when coach and selectors pick a team conducive to conditions and environment. And that's such a great point. And again, just to add on to that, it's important that the coach and selectors communicate that well enough to players that this is why we've gone this route, and get the buy-in of, and you talk about getting the buy-in of players. And sometimes it's not always going to be that easy because guys are going to be aggrieved that they're not playing. But understanding the bigger picture of what we're trying to achieve as a team, it's important, and ultimately your culture will drive that.
Definitely, and you're not always going to agree necessarily as a selection panel. You know, other guys will have various motives or whatever else, and that's where you as a coach, because you're getting to see the players every single day, it's important that you have a real understanding of what's going to get the best out of that player. What is he showing at training sessions? And then it's important for you to be able to communicate that back to a selection panel too, because maybe not everybody on that selection panel might be seeing the players on a daily basis or even a weekly basis. Yeah. So again, it's a little bit of bartering between a selection panel too, but effective communication even there is vital. But a very good point that Lindsay brings up. Okay, moving on. In terms of leadership, and don't worry guys, any other questions we don't get to, we're going to try and answer them in the end. In terms of leadership, Jason, this is something you're massive on, and so am I, and I think it can be so vital and a huge cog within creating structure within your environment. So the first thing is, I'm going to go through a few of these, and then I've got a few questions for you personally, James. First thing is identifying your leaders and how we go about identifying our leaders. Now, on every specific level, it's going to be in many, many different ways. It's amazing how more often than not, a lot of environments just pick their best player to be their leader, and that doesn't necessarily almost work. I think you've got to pick your most effective captain, and we can use many, many different examples of that, of different leadership styles, etc. But I'm going to get to JP with that in a couple of minutes. The second thing is, once we've identified our leaders, we have to create opportunities for them to lead, for them to make decisions, and also for them to get things wrong. So the only way sometimes we learn is by getting things wrong. So we have to create more and more opportunities, whether that's in training, whether that's in match environments, or whether that's even putting them in different environments like dealing with the media, coaching themselves. I find sending our players to actually go and coach teaches them a lot about their own games. So we need to keep creating opportunities for them to become leaders. The next thing we need to do is surround them with mentors, surround them with other leaders that can ultimately help them. I think that goes without saying. Another thing, put them in pressure situations, which kind of ties in with creating opportunities, but they need to be under pressure to be able to become better leaders. And then the last thing, and something you big on, Japes, review and feedback constantly. So Japes, my question to you is, you were in leadership roles throughout your career. What sort of leader were you?
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned my career, and probably more in roles towards the back sort of 5 to 7 years of my career. And something that came probably more natural to me was servant leadership. And I mean, if you think about leadership, that can be broken down into various ways of how you operate. But something that was true to me was servant leadership, because I found that for me to be an effective leader, I needed to make sure that I invested a lot of my energy into the people around me. So if I'm a captain, I need to make sure that I'm having communication with my players or my teammates to know that I back them, one, but also that I know how to get the best out of them, particularly in those pressure moments. How do I get the best out of them? What makes them tick? And often these relationships were built off the field. So it's important for me to invest time into them in terms of having conversations and just checking in with them and finding out more about them. Something that I put a lot of emphasis on, and this was probably more when I was, call it, a leader without the title in the team, and I might have mentioned it before, was I invested a lot of time consciously into spending time in different cultures, because we have a team and a country that's so diverse. it was important for me to understand the different cultures and how things operated within that culture. Because ultimately, if I know that, I know how to get the best out of certain people. Now, I didn't always get it right, but my point is that I was conscious about that, and that stemmed from a servant sort of hearted leader, because that was something that I've come to understand a lot better, and it was probably something that I was more had a natural tendency to. But they certainly, it's not the only way, but I think it crosses a lot of other leadership styles. You know, you get I researched this actually, participative leadership, you get autocratic leadership, and transformational leadership. And what I found when reading up on these things, you know, being a servant leader, you actually use a lot of those attributes. So, you know, yes, you have a definitive thing possibly that really drives you and is your purpose, but you'll definitely grab from different styles, and you'll learn along the way as you go as well.
Interesting. I saw an interesting quote the other day, and they were saying they believe that the reason the Indians were able, in this last series, were able to come back and play the way that they did was they almost believe, because Virat Kohli is quite a direct leader, he demands a lot from his players. Almost Rahane coming in as a leader who's very relaxed and very laid back. They almost feel that was one of the reasons that India were able to get back into the series, because all the pressure was almost off them in many ways. Now, I don't know if that is the reason, but for me, that Rahane had a very different leadership style to maybe a Virat Kohli. And you know Virat, JP, so you know you don't need to speak about character specifically, but it's amazing all the different leadership styles that you can get. My next question to you is what level of support did you have to develop your leadership skills? I mean, did they surround you with a support base for this? I know you had some really good senior players, other leaders around you, but looking back, was there anything you could have done differently?
I wouldn't say done differently, but the short answer is yes. I had some good people around me, but also it was important for me to formulate that structure around me. And again, I mean, I speak from a place where I haven't had extensive leadership opportunities, but I have had a few, and I've really enjoyed it. It's actually in my view, it's brought out the best in my game, because it's taken a lot of the focus off me and on others. And often, you know, some people respond well to that. So I've certainly responded well to that. And for me, it was identifying in certain areas that I wanted to improve within my leadership. Who do I feel would add the most value to me in that situation? And it's not only going to be in the team. I found myself a lot on Zoom conversations, particularly when you're on tour, with people that I found to be mentors for me in different spheres of my life, to ask good questions to them. And how can I, in a certain situation, how can I best serve the person in that situation, and give me sort of tangible examples of what I can do. So that was something that I put a lot of focus on. And for me, the most important relationship in leadership is, from a team context, is always going to be your player and your coach. We can't emphasize that enough. So for us as coaches going forward, I believe that this point is something that you really need to be conscious of on any level. If you have a sound relationship with your captain, I think people will really start respecting you more, or players in your team will really start respecting you more, because ultimately there's going to be a magnifying glass on that relationship to see how you respond through adversity and when you're playing well.
Brilliant. Love it, Joe. So I see a few comments on the side here, and just to go back to Russell, I find for the most part players thrive more so than not when their roles are defined. I think it's a very valid point. You know, once the roles are really clear, and to go back to role definition, Russell, it's amazing what sort of performance you can get out of your players once those really are defined, and more importantly, once the team really understands all of those roles. The other thing is adaptability in role definition. Again, being adaptable, creating opportunity, not just putting a guy in a certain role and just leaving him there. They're also allowing younger players to really try different things. I'm a huge advocate of younger players being put into different roles and seeing what they're really good at, giving them opportunity to really, you know, try open the batting, try keep wicket. I'm talking more from the younger age now. And then Fossi says, yeah, in today's time, players don't like to be pigeonholed as a specific type of player or defined to a specific role. Simply too much money, to be made that players are willing to sacrifice their true skill set. Your thoughts on that, Japes?
Sorry, just say that again.
So in today's time, players don't like to be pigeonholed as a specific type of player or defined to a specific role. There's simply too much money to be made that players are willing to sacrifice their true skill set.
It's such a complex scenario when you think about that. And I don't think we should, to be honest. I don't think we should pigeonhole players. I think we should always try and encourage them to improve and broaden their minds in terms of their thinking of what I can and can't do. Because I don't think we should be focusing on what I can't do. It's what can I do? And I think, you know, if I can use an example, Dean Elgar as an example. For many years, pigeonholed as a red ball player, and then took it upon himself to work out certain game plans that will enhance him in terms of white ball cricket, and really advanced himself in terms of that format. So I think we as coaches really need to encourage that for the most part.
Definitely. Barry says, yeah, identifying leaders from an early age, I feel, is a key part of a junior coach's remit to help them grow in their own confidence and leadership style as they go through the various pathways. So, Joseph, I don't know if you were exposed to leadership from a young age, but I certainly was. But I think there's real value in exposing various different people. You know, within a younger team, I would think of opportunities to give a lot of different sort of leadership roles within a team to really try to identify who your leaders might be. And often the test is not when you are the captain. Sometimes the test might be when you're not the captain. How do you handle that? You know, how do you allow someone else to put that captain's armband on? So I think that's also quite a good way of looking into it. Some good conversation, guys, but just a quick recap and keep your questions coming, because we're coming to the end of the nuts and bolts section here. So just in terms of planning sessions, just a little wagon wheel I've put for you guys, something to consider. The first thing is your time management. The second thing is think about how effective you want those sessions to be. The third thing is really utilizing all your resources available to you. And the last thing is really create enjoyment in those sessions, and ultimately your sessions will be really well structured, well planned, and generally players will come back and be pretty happy. Okay, I've got Mr. Duminy playing a pull shot there on the right-hand side, Japes. I'm sure that brings back some good memories for you. And then this next thing is just in terms of structure, lads. So the first thing is really good communication, scheduling. So make sure you schedule really well so your players know what's ahead of them and what's to come and how you're going to get there. Paint a really good roadmap for them. The third thing is identifying their role, making it very clear, get them to train in their role, get the team to understand their role. And the last thing is get really good leadership within your group, because if you get good leadership within your group, which also includes your support staff and your players, I think ultimately that will create better structure within your environment. That's me. Don't worry, I'm not holding the bat the wrong way around. That's just nicking off the edge. And I hope I got that one right there. But you can see me wearing a helmet because I think I wasn't really trusting the thrower on that day. So, so guys, in terms of the content, that's what we really wanted to deliver to you guys today. And I hope that it just helps a few of the questions you might have. It just gives you a couple of different ideas of how to do things. And hopefully JP and myself have just, you know, maybe spoken about things that might be very relevant to you. So we're happy to take a couple of questions now, and then we'll just finish it off with Mikey once again. So please put your questions into the column on the right here, and we're more than happy to answer them. And then we'll finish off day 4's play. We're going into the final couple of overs now, Mikey. So we're almost there.
Yeah, Shano, there's a question here from Fossey. We all reach certain plateau in skill sets, in skill level. The only way to continue growing and gain more knowledge is by getting challenged at a higher level. How do we then get to grow if positions require certain knowledge and experience, but we don't get the opportunity at that level? And I think you, in many ways, are a prime example of that.
Yeah, I think it's such a valuable point, and I think you know, Fossey, I think sometimes in life you just require a certain amount of luck too, and for some things to fall in your way. I mean, it's just, you know, sometimes you could have all the knowledge, have all the expertise, but sometimes, you know, I just believe things happen for a reason in life. But for me, it's more when given an opportunity, when you've actually got hold of something, it's what you actually physically make of it, you know. And again, it's another way of sending a message across, of achieving a dream, of achieving a goal. So when God given that opportunity, the key is how you really go about utilizing it. And I'm not saying you personally haven't, because you're someone that I know very well, but I think that's always the conundrum in life, is sometimes you just need a little bit of luck. And the thing I've always found when I was still a player, I was always looking for that one person to back me. I always wanted that coach to back me and give me the real backing that I required. And when I really started making a dent, especially when I remember I got left out of the Lions team quite a bit, and I thought, well, I'm performing, I'm doing all the right things. It goes back to that question again, maybe more as a player. What skills can I develop? What can I do to make sure that I'm pushing in? So as a coach, what skills can I develop? What am I lacking? What am I short of that can ultimately really give me a push into that next level? And again, I don't have the exact answer for you, but it's just a couple of questions you can ask.
I'm just going to sort of jump in on there, Shane, as well. And one of those skills is the talk that we gave yesterday on that managing stakeholders. I think you might be able to perform and get your team to give the good results, but that's something that you can do kind of off the park, which can also help you with your career going forward. Is how well are you actually really managing all those stakeholders, and are you identifying the right people that make a purpose, not for you to use as a stepping stone, but like Shane is asking for somebody that's backing you, because you never know when that stakeholder's in another situation, and he might, you might be the next person that comes to mind when it comes to mentioning you or an opportunity. At least then you're in the back of his mind. I think managing stakeholders is a brilliant area, which is often overlooked by coaches.
Definitely.
Yeah. Then Aya has a question on the communication side. How important is body language? And maybe Shane, this is something that you've possibly experienced. What are the things that you look out for as a coach from ourselves that we should avoid, firstly? And what can you look out for from a player's point of view?
Yeah, it's great question, Aya. And I think you quite often need to look into it, and you can't see yourself, but quite often in body language, it gives off quite a few answers quite often. So for example, if someone comes to me and I'm lounging around, or I might have my arms folded, for as an example, that often gives off the impression that I'm not very open to want to be receiving questions right now. So just be very mindful of your body language and how you maybe use your hands in explaining things, etc. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but I think just be very mindful of the actions that you might be showing from your body language, and from a playing point of view, JP could tell you, walking to the wicket might send a certain message about how you puff your chest out and you walk out, and it just gives off sometimes quite a either a good or a bad impression of that person just purely by their body language.
Spot on. Then Sean has one off the topic. Shane, was it an ambition of yours to become a coach? And if not, how did you come about finding this calling?
Sean, it's I think it was always secretly it was an ambition of mine to play for South Africa, and I think the stark reality is I just wasn't good enough. And I made sure that I come from a history of coaches in my family, so I think I always, without even knowing it, I always knew that I had I always had the backing of what I had in my family to get into the coaching world. However, I wanted to learn from my experiences and make sure that the mistakes I maybe made as a player was ultimately going to make me a better coach. And I think that's why I wanted to go into coaching. So whilst I don't get all the accolades of playing, I don't get to bowl the ball anymore, I don't get to hit the ball, I get all the things that I used to get from cricket that I really used to love, which was the changing room, the strategy, the seeing people do well. For me, that's what coaching is all about. So that's why I really ultimately went into coaching.
Thanks, Shane. And then Jean has a question: to develop a more adaptable team, how do you simulate match-like pressure during a training session to improve aspects like fear of failure or choking as a team? I just wanted to make a point, and then you could probably add on, Shane. So it's interesting because I think this, from my perspective, at least from a player's perspective, I think this starts with honest conversation. And you are also reliant on players having some honest or giving some honest feedback in that. Now, whether that is from a team context or individual. So if I'm struggling with something in my game that I know there's a fear of failure on it, that I know it's allowing me to choke. So as an example, there was a period in my career where I had challenges with the short ball. So firstly, I needed to have an honest conversation with my coach at the time and saying, listen, this is a fear of mine. And I needed to put my big boy pants on and say, right, how are we going to get through this? And for me, it was going into that nets and facing hours and hours of short ball. Yes, we started slowly. We started with, say, tennis balls, then moved on to balls. But for me, it was important to own up to the fear and then to face up to it. But knowing that my coach or my teammates are walking the journey with me, and then maybe you could add on in terms of a team perspective, how have you found it as a coach to get through those periods?
Chase, I think you've hit the nail on the head. The first thing is identifying and actually owning up to it. You know, if you, let's be honest, no one enjoys facing 145k an hour short ball. I don't think anybody, even Ricky Ponting will tell you he doesn't enjoy that. But I think once you've owned up to that, and then you are able to work with someone to, not to get over the fear, but to make you, to give you more skills to get over that fear, to be able to play the short ball, just using that as an example is the first thing. I think the most important thing in all of this, guys, is creating a relationship where you really feel you can be honest with one another. You feel you can talk about the things that you really are thinking. You know, I think once you get to that level of engagement with a player, and it's sometimes very hard to find that, especially with younger players, because they're going to keep developing over time. But once you get to that level, and there's that, you know, JP mentioned it, there's that relationship equity between a coach and a player. That's a pretty good place to be. Then you're ultimately gonna be able to come up with answers. How you go about training it, and I think it was Jean that asked the question, was it? There are many ways you can have challenging training. You can make training tougher by, you know, involving two balls when you're fielding. You're never going to catch two balls, but it just adds to the pressure. When you're throwing, we've got sidearms nowadays that you can get closer and throw to someone. You can use a bowling machine. You can get people to run in between and make them tired, you know. So there's various ways you can challenge people at training. And I think, again, that's up to you as a coach to find what really works.
So I wanted to open this up for somebody that has maybe experienced this to possibly answer Barry's question. And if you have been through it or have an answer, the question is, our club is only into its 8th year of existence, and our juniors have been brought through in a very fun-based environment. We are taking the club onto the next level this year and add a performance side to our junior setup. So these sessions have been great in giving us an insight as to what we need to be doing as coaches. My question is, how can you help take the ordinary junior who has just played softball into the hardball setup? Must be something in the water calendar. We have a lot. Does somebody have anything to add around that question, if I may ask, in the experience in dealing with young kids that have come through? Have you had any, Shane?
Well, I think I'm just trying to put myself in Barry's shoes there and see what they might be going through at the club. And the answer I've got is, until you actually physically get the kid to pad up and face the hard ball, you'll never know. So for me, it's about creating opportunities again for those kids to face hard balls, to get pads on, because the first thing you'll notice when kids put pads on is they run with straight legs. You know, so actually sometimes the first thing is to teach them how to pad up, where everything goes, how everything works, that there's real fun to actually getting the equipment on, why they use certain equipment. It's a hell of a change within a player's environment, you know. And for me, it's actually physically doing that. And how do you create sessions that make it really fun to do that, which will ultimately get them to buy into the harder ball and a lot quicker. So whilst I don't have an exact answer for you, Barry, my observation would be is don't be scared to throw people sometimes into the deep end and see if they can swim.
Fossey, do you have something to say? I think your microphone is off.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, all good.
Okay, so I do a bit of private coaching with young players, and also that transitional phase between softball and hardball. Now, I'm not saying my method is the beans of all beans, but what I usually started doing is I put the player inside the net without any pads, and I would literally sit 1 yard away from him with hard balls, and he would have the necessary protective gear between the legs. And I would actually underarm lob the ball against his body. so that he starts experiencing the impact. And while I do that, I prepare him with proper communication. Something that you guys have hammered on so far on these webinars is communication, and say, do you feel that? Does it hurt? No, it doesn't. Go a little bit harder. Does it hurt? Yes. Are you still alive? Yes, I'm still alive. So positive empowerment in relation to the physical experience eradicates the fear of the ball eventually. Then you move back 2 yards where the velocity of the ball is increased, where the impact is increased a little bit more. Yet when the player reacts to the impact, you positively encourages him to react to that, because we try to teach players, you don't get a medal for bravery or expressing or showing your feelings when you get hurt. So encourage the kid to share with you that the ball actually hurts. But then you positively empower him by saying, but look, you're still alive. Can you face the next ball? And the player or the young kid actually responds and says, yes, I can. And you just start furthering the distance between yourself and that player, where the velocity of the ball increases, not exponentially, but in small margins, where the player actually, like a layer of onions, peel off the layers themselves, because they start expecting what is about to happen. And then when you add the tools into their hands with protective gear and the batting, they are already mentally prepared for what is coming. But more often than not, we think by chucking them into the nets with pads and everything, now they got to face up to the hard ball. But we haven't positively empowered and educated them as to what the ball actually does and what you can do to the ball when you have the proper training equipment. That's just my 5 cents worth.
Yeah, the nice thing about that method too, just to maybe add on to that, is more often than not, when you put equipment on someone, a helmet, for example, more often than not, players will actually stop watching the ball because they feel they have the helmet, and that takes away, so another skill we might use, especially with some of the senior players with a short ball, is actually take your helmet off. Take your helmet off, and now we're going to play the short ball. And you might think, I'm talking more at a senior level, actually makes him play the short ball better and watch the ball better. So firstly, I think an amazing way of doing it, and the fact that you've done that and knowing that it works, is something that Barry can take to his club.
Spot on. Thanks, Fossey.
Thanks, you good looking rooster.
I think we've covered most of the questions, if I'm not mistaken. Mikey, you there?
I think that's everything. That I can't see any other ones that you guys have missed.
Okay, cool. You want
All right.
towards the end there?
Okay, cool. Okay, so thanks JP, Shane. Very insightful. I think it was awesome to see. I'm going to, as we said, we're going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to just again present opportunities for people to get more involved with Shane and JP on different levels. So I'll just put those up again as normal, and then we're going to end just a little bit differently, where we're going to ask you guys a bit of feedback for us. Okay. All right. So again, like I said, just to present some opportunities for others to get more individually involved with Shane and JP. Okay, right. So the website's at the bottom there. The place where you can register, jp21coaching.com/planning and structures offers. Okay, so first offer number 1 is for 3 1-hour group calls, and it will be a lot more detail on planning sessions and structures. Okay, so it's another 3 hours of this same topic, but obviously it's going to be a Zoom call, or kind of like this, where there's a lot more interaction, a lot fewer seats, and they're literally kind of holding your hand, so to speak. Okay, so again, time for JP and Shane like this would normally be 500 Rand. Because it's our launch week, it's going to be about 250 an hour. And as I said yesterday, Donald Trump is really helping you guys along, making it even cheaper than that, because it's US dollars that we are selling at. Okay, so when you go through the registration processes, you'll see US dollars, not South African rands. Offer number 2 is a private call, a 2-hour call one-on-one, obviously also discussing planning sessions. So if you're really wanting Shane and JP to help you individually plan your sessions with your team at whatever stage through the season, you can have their individual help one-on-one. Again, one-on-one, you're looking at normally about $2,000 an hour of these guys' time, but they are being very kind and giving it away at 1,600 Rand for 2 hours. Okay, so that's 800 Rand an hour. So that's about 60% discount. And once again, thanks to Trump, it's gone up to almost 70, I think. All right. Final offer is everything in offer number 2. So you get your private call, your one-on-one session with JP and Shane, and then you get into the mastermind group, the mentorship group, where you've got Shane and JP as your mentors for a whole year. Okay, that is being able to call on these guys for whatever the situation is over a period of the year. They had already planned out and structured how it's going to be kind of working. But yes, there's only 5 spots that are available in total, okay, for the mentorship group. A few of them have already gone. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic opportunity. It comes down to about 13,000 Rand now with the current US dollar the way it is as of yesterday. So, and as I said yesterday as well, this is payable not just upfront as one payment, which you can make it as one payment, but you can also break it down over 3 months and have it as a 3 installments. All right. So those are the opportunities to see them side by side. Offer number 1. Okay. Offer number 2 is the private call. And offer number 3 is the private call plus the mastermind mentorship group. Okay. All right. So the other offers are still on for the week. So the first call, first webinar we had was on performance planning. So I've tried to make it as easy as possible for everybody. So the jp21coaching.com / and then it's just the name of the webinar basically. So it would be performance planning offers was the first webinar. If you're interested more in performance planning guidance from these 2 guys, the second webinar was game plan offers. So it's jp21coaching.com / game plan offers. They are still available. And then obviously yesterday's webinar, so it'll be jp21coaching.com / managing stakeholders offers. And then there's today's, if you're interested in more into planning and structures, jp21coaching.com / planning and structures offers. Okay. So if you're interested in more details from these 2 guys, please jump on to those websites there and book your spot with them. All right. As we said, we will be doing a lucky draw. They've agreed to doing it, and what we're going to be doing is bumping somebody up. So in other words, if you have purchased an offer number 1, you might get bumped up to a private call and get offer number 2. If you've ordered offer number 2, you might get bumped up and order and find yourself in the mastermind mentorship group. Okay, so one lucky person will do that. We'll do that draw after this week, at the end of the week, and we'll go through that. All right. Okay, so I think we'll all agree that we've all had a lot of value has been added this week. You guys have picked up a lot of insights. I think it's been brilliant. I've learned a lot from these 2 guys already as well. I'm sitting here and they've been giving and giving and giving, and now we're going to ask for just a little bit back from you guys. I've just got 5 questions, okay, that we would like answers from you guys. Thank you very much for all your guys' feedback. And as you have been the whole week, you guys, you'll get another email to probably tomorrow asking for your feedback on today's webinar, and please feel free to go into detail there and give us as much criticism as you can. We open to it. But yeah, thanks very much for everybody that has already given us feedback through through those emails and just answering directly. So greatly appreciate it. I just want to say thank you once again for all your time this whole week. It's been great. Great having you guys. Great to meet you guys and start to see your names. And I'll definitely be keeping an eye out in the future. And we've got your email addresses, so we'll keep you all posted with anything coming in the future.
Thanks, Mikey. Shane, you've been the captain of our ship over the last 4 days. So I'll give you the last word. Just a quick thank you from me. Thank you to all the coaches that have come on the platform. Great to interact, and I think it was mentioned in the platform there of that has been the best part. It's certainly been the best part for me as well, just to kind of break the ice in terms of that conversation. So it was good. So thank you. Really appreciated it. Really enjoyed it for the first time. So thank you very much. Over to you, Shane.
Thanks, Chase. Very kind of you. Just from my side, just want to thank everybody involved. I've also thoroughly enjoyed the conversations. It's the first time we've done something like this, so there's going to be areas we can improve in. But my final word is you're probably sick of my voice by now, so I'm going to say thank you very much, guys. Please keep in touch. Okay, even if you don't want to be a part of that network, please keep in touch. And Japes, I thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you, and Mikey, thanks for steadying the ship. All the best, guys. Take care.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers, eh?